Hello and welcome back. I'm Matt Hohan, and tonight we're going to be covering Section 3, Fire Service Ladders. And for ladders, the slideshow itself is not going to be too long, but the skills and when we practice them is going to be pretty extensive. There's many different types of ladders. There's many different ways to move a ladder. There's many different ways to lift a ladder. And then, of course, there's just as many ways to get yourself hurt really bad with a ladder, or even worse, killed. And that's what we're going to be going over extensively in the skills portion of the class. Hopefully the slideshow itself won't be too long. Introduction to fire service ladders. Identify each type of ladder and define its use. Single ladders are not common in the fire service. We do have them. We have one, and it's on ladder 1. You'll find it on the ladder rack, and we'll go over how to use it. The only interesting thing about the single ladder is it's literally just a ladder. It doesn't fold, it doesn't move, it doesn't extend, it's just a straight up ladder. Now, roof ladders are very handy in the fire service, and you can guess where we use them: on the roof. The identifying characteristics of a roof ladder is at the tip of this ladder there's 2 hooks, and those hooks, what you would do is put the ladder on the roof, lay the ladder flat on the roof, and hook those hooks at the peak of the roof. Folding ladders, we have multiple folding ladders. We have the little giants, and they're on most of our apparatus. And we'll go over extensively how to use them. They're an incredibly powerful piece of equipment on scene because they're so versatile. Now, extension ladders is the bread and butter of the fire service ladder use. Most of everything that we'll be doing on scene will be with an extension ladder, and they're not hard to use, but they can be tricky to set up. Now, combination ladders, I honestly don't know what a combination ladder is. We'll just have to go and actually look it up and see what it is. Attic ladders are a very situational specific ladder, typically used on the inside of a house, and they're fantastic for any narrow, tight spaces that the big extension ladders just won't reach around. And again, we'll go over extensive use of each ladder in our skills portion. Properly picking up, carrying, and lowering a ladder using the following methods. Before I go into the methods, I really can't emphasize this enough. I couldn't tell you how many people I know that have hurt themselves on scene from moving a ladder wrong. It's ridiculous at how often people get hurt moving a ladder. Most of the time they get hurt because they're trying to move the ladder by themselves, and they don't know how to move a ladder by themselves, and what they end up doing is hurting the hell out of their back. Now, this is definitely a skill slide. I'm not going to go into great detail on this because you're going to be doing this on the skills day. But one firefighter carry will learn how to move the 10-foot attic ladder, the 14-foot roof ladder, and the 14-foot roof ladder and climbing an extension. Now, the 2 firefighter carry will work on moving the 24-foot 2-section extension ladder, and then we'll also be covering a 2 firefighter carry and a 3 firefighter carry for our 35-foot extension ladder that we do have on our ladder truck. Load capacities for ground ladders according to NFPA 1931. It's really important that you actually understand what the load capacity is of a ladder. And there's a reason for this, because you don't really want to be figuring out that you have too much weight on the ladder when you're 20 feet in the air, 30 feet in the air, or hanging off the side of a building on the roof ladder. Now, we will specifically go through all the stickers and the warnings and the labeling that's physically attached to each ladder. This is the skills portion, and we'll go through it in a lot of detail, and you're going to think that I'm insane as we go through all the labels that are associated with a ladder. But guess what? There's a reason those labels are put there, and it wasn't because the manufacturer decided to put them there at the beginning. Those labels ended up there because people significantly screwed up, got hurt really bad, or killed. Then the manufacturer said, hey, by the way, we probably ought to put these labels on here so we can't get sued anymore. It's a major factor when working off of a ladder. The weight of the ladder is dependent upon how many people are on the ladder. And sometimes when you're busy on a scene, you're not thinking about how much weight the ladder can physically hold. Climb the full length of each of the following types of ladders. Okay, before we just dive off into climbing a ladder, I really want you guys to know something. If you don't like heights, or you have a problem with heights, or anything associated with ladders, I need you to at least try and physically climb the ladder. I don't care if you reach the very tip of the ladder. That's not important. What's important is that you actually find what you can work off of comfortably. We don't want to be figuring this out on scene. And let me tell you, there's a big difference between our 24-foot or a 35-foot extension ladder and working off of the tip of our 105-foot aerial. Both are completely different monsters, and both can get you hurt or killed if you don't know how to work off of them properly. The other thing I want to add to this is that probably 90% of our department doesn't like working off of the 105-foot aerial. A lot of people have problems with heights. I have a pretty healthy understanding and respect for gravity. With that said, I'm one of the few people that'll work off of that 105-foot aerial. Everyone has a role in a job they can fulfill on scene. If you don't like ladders or you're terrified of ladders, don't be on a ladder on an emergency scene. That's stupid. Now, I will have you climb the 8-foot attic ladder, the 14-foot roof ladder, a 24-foot extension ladder, and I'm going to definitely have you at least try the 105-foot aerial. Again, this is the skills portion. Techniques of cleaning ladders. So after a scene and you have a ladder that needs to be cleaned, there's a couple of things that need to actually happen with this. It's not just cleaning, it's a physical inspection of the ladder. Okay? So when you clean a ladder, don't use a flamethrower or bleach or hydrochloric acid to clean the ladder. Soap and water is just fine. Use a rag and a brush. Here's the kicker though. If you're cleaning something like an extension ladder, there's a good chance you might be potentially knocking off all of the agent that the extension ladder runs against as it's extended. So what do you put back in place of that agent? It's nothing but wax. We don't use grease. We don't use a lithium grease. We don't use Crisco. And there's a reason for it. All that stuff, as it gets hot, it's going to physically burn onto the ladder or potentially cause damage to the aluminum as it's burning. Paraffin wax doesn't do that. Paraffin wax just simply heats up and rolls away at a very low temperature. Also, when you're cleaning the ladders, you need to definitely check out the halyards, the ropes. Take a look at those, see what kind of shape they're in. We'll definitely go into a lot more detail on cleaning of the ladders in the skills portion. Name the parts of various fire service ladders. Now the good thing here is that the vast majority of all of our ladders, even if they come in different shapes, size, and forms, they've all got the general name parts of the ladder to be the same. Okay, so we're going to start at the beam. The beam is the physical outside of the ladder. The rungs are what you put your hands and feet on. The beam attaches to the rungs. Now the bed section are found on extension ladders, and the bed section is the section of the ladder that stays down. The fly or extension is the part of the ladder that raises. Now the butt of the ladder is literally just the very bottom of the ladder that connects to the ground. A butt spur is literally a type of hook or claw or pointy edge that just points down into the ground for extra traction. We've already talked about the fly section. Now the guides are where the fly section, as it's being extended, are channels that are cut into the beam to help hold and secure the fly to only move in one position that you're moving it, not be able to fall out left or right or in or out of the ladder. Halyards, we've already talked about that. That's the rope. Heat sensor labels, will go through where the labels are at and what they look like and how to read them. Hooks are only on roof ladders, and that's at the very tip of the ladder. Again, the hooks are what we use to hook at the peak of the roof. Paws or dogs are at the bottom of the ladder. They can sometimes be replacing the butt or the butt spurs, and all it is just little pads that the bottom of the ladder sits on. Sometimes those pads have a little swivel that they sit on so that the very foot of the ladder can pivot around the paws or the dogs while they're sitting on the flat on the ground. Protection plates for the pulley, kind of self-explanatory there. It's just so that debris and crap can't fall into the pulley. And then you've got the physical rail, which is the same as the beam. It's the vertical part of the ladder. Now, stay poles, we don't have any ladders with stay poles. If we had any extension ladders that were over 35 feet, that's when we'd start getting into stay poles. And stay poles are used to help extend a physical ladder up into the air, but it's also there to help add support to the ladder. The longest extension ladder I've ever climbed is 75 feet, and I assure you, it was terrifying. It was fantastic, but it was terrifying. Now the stops are on extension ladders, and that physically stops the extension part of the ladder, the fly section, from being able to raise out of the base. And then the tip of the ladder, self-explanatory, it's the very tip of the ladder that's the working end of the ladder. Safety aspects of handling, raising, and climbing ladders. All of this will be covered in great detail on the skills portion, but we're going to go ahead and brief through this real quick. And we have a great physical reminder here at this station every time that you see him on scene or at the station. Just go up to our Assistant Chief, Mac Bennett, and look at his right elbow. He has a fantastic injury that he got from the improper use of a ladder and the effects of gravity. Describe the following hazards associated with carrying a ground ladder. Moving and guiding. Ladders are long. They're rigid. It's hard to move in a physical position just in a straight line with a ladder. There's a lot of obstacles that you have to take into consideration when you're moving a ladder. Other personnel. You need to let people know that you're moving a ladder around them. And then finally, obstacles. Again, we'll figure this out in the skills portion. Describe the following hazards associated with raising a ground ladder. Guys, where are electrical lines run? They're up in the air. What are you doing with a ladder? You're taking it up in the air. Every year, there's always one or two poor SOBs that get electrocuted or get their feet blown off or get their hands blown off because they raised a frickin' ladder into the power lines. For the love of God, always look up. Get in the habit. Always look up. Get in the habit of checking for overhead obstacles every single time you lift a ladder. I cannot emphasize it enough. Now, exposure to heat or flame. That ladder's aluminum. Aluminum does not have a very high melting temperature. You can cause a massive amount of damage to a ladder by intentionally putting it in the heat or flame. Don't do it. Also think of the safety aspect of it. If it's too hot for the ladder, guess who else it's too hot for? You. So don't do it. Stability of the building. This is kind of a sneaky one, okay? But you need to think about the ultimate consequences here. When you're standing on a ladder, the ladder's leaning into the building, correct? So if the building starts to collapse or the surface that the ladder's leaning against is unstable, which way are you going to fall? Which way is the ladder going to fall? That's right, into the fiery pit of death. Don't do it. You need to make sure that that structure is stable enough to be able to handle putting a ladder on the side of the building. High traffic areas, doorways and windows. If you have firefighters doing an interior attack, a ladder should never be set up in front of a doorway or a window. Why? Well, it's a simple egress problem. If people need to get out, they're going to come barreling through that door or window, and they're going to hit the ladder. Well, for them, at the end of the day, they don't really care, do they? But where are you at? You're working on the ladder. So what's the chance of having a major incident if someone comes running out of a building hitting the ladder? It exponentially goes up. Uneven terrain. Flat and stable surfaces, non-skid surfaces, and soft spots. Guys, this is basic leverage, okay? This is the most prominent point at where people get injured on scene, is they set a ladder up, they don't have anyone else holding the ladder, keeping their buddy there, helping to hold the ladder in place so it doesn't fall. And then because it's not on a flat surface or it's not on a stable surface, the ladder falls over. In the wintertime, not a big issue here, but you go up further north, and the people are setting ladders up on snow and ice. Not exactly a non-skid surface. Soft spots. You've brought a bunch of water on scene. You start pouring water all over the building. Where's that water going? Well, it's going on the ground. Where's the ladder set up? On the ground. If it's not on concrete and you're in the front yard or backyard, is there a potential that that nice stable ground that you have the ladder set up in could now turn into a big mud pit, no longer allowing for a solid surface for the ladder to operate off of? Of course. Finally, overhead obstructions. Guys, again, electricity. You've got to check for overhead obstructions before you lift the ladder. You need to point them out. It needs to be both people looking for the overhead obstructions. I don't care what you think that cable is. You don't know what the homeowner has done with the house. It might look like a simple telephone or cable line. They could have very well taken black market electricity off the pole and run it into their house off of that line. Don't lift ladders into wires. Okay, we've already talked about windows. Big one is falling debris. It's not necessarily a hazard for the firefighter that's working at the point at where they're removing the debris. Where's the hazard at? The hazard's down on the ground for the people that are at the bottom of the ladder. And then ultimately overhangs. We don't know how stable that overhang is. There's a big difference between putting that ladder up on a solid wall and putting that ladder on an eave. Raising and climbing. Full protective equipment. You always need to have your PPE on when you're going up a ladder. What is the PPE for just standard ladder climbing? Helmet, eye protection, gloves, long pants, and good steel-toed shoes. And then, of course, if you're working on a fire scene, standard fire scene PPE. We will go through the proper lifting methods. Always lift with your knees, don't bend over at your back, on and on. Ladder angle and spacing, that's a lot easier to show in person, and we'll go through that. We'll show you how the pawls are locked and how to tie off a halyard, how a person is to heel a ladder and how to tie a ladder off at the tip, hand placement and positioning when climbing, and climbing with the same hand and foot. And then finally, techniques of working from ground ladders with tools and equipment. Working off a ladder with various tools, deployment of a roof ladder on a pitched roof, climbing with and using hoses, and then ultimately our aerial ladders, and then of course our zone of collapse from structures. Guys, again, this is a very, very heavily skills slide. I'm not going to go into great detail on it here. Just some simple pictures to discuss real quick on ladder safety. We'll start at the very top left where we see an aerial that has collapsed. Now, that ladder actually didn't collapse because of anything the fire department did. That ladder was failed due to the manufacturer's engineering. Luckily, there was no one on the tip. Let's go to the top middle. You can see that the ladder there is set up on a hillside, and they didn't have very good awareness for ladder setup and what can potentially happen with the weight of the firefighter at the tip of the ladder. Top right, careful with setting a ladder up on stairs. It can get you in trouble. Bottom left, here we have an aerial that was set up and swung into power lines. Yes, the truck's on fire. We'll go into detail on what to happen in the event that you're on an apparatus and you've gotten into power lines. And then the bottom right, we see a fantastic picture of guys that are, well, they've screwed up everything you can possibly screw up with a ladder. We'll go into detail on this stuff on the skills. Proper ladder for the job to be done, and the maximum working heights for fire service ladders. Guys, the biggest thing that when you're setting a ladder up is that in this picture, you have guys that are working off a ladder and it looks like that they're obviously going to the roof. The proper ladder height is the ability to be on the roof and walk up to the ladder and be able to just grab the tip of the ladder standing there and then work to the edge of the ladder and finally down. You don't want the ladder raised just to the very edge of the roof because there's nothing for the firefighter to hold on to as they're trying to actually navigate from the roof to the actual working ladder. So to be able to determine the proper length of the ladder, what you have to do is make sure that the ladder's long enough to be able to get 3 rungs above the tip of the working surface. The following ground ladders set at the proper climbing angle. We'll go through how to set proper climbing angle as a skill, and it's a universal thing. It doesn't change from ladder to ladder. If you always use this one technique, it'll always be set at the proper angle. Proper placement and positioning of each type of fire service ladder for different types of jobs. Okay, the proper angle is going to be approximately 70 degrees. Okay, and we'll talk about how to physically get that 70-degree angle on scene on the skills. Okay, proper placement of a ground ladder for ventilation, roof ops, rescue, or other factors. Again, if you're working off the roof, you want the ladder extended 3 to 4 rungs above the roof line. That way that the firefighters can just walk up to the ladder. Okay, and that'll take care of ventilation and roof ops. Now, rescue's a little bit of a different operation. It's going to be entirely situational. I don't have a clue at what the particular scenario is before I can even recommend on proper placement. And unfortunately, we can practice and prepare for this all we want, but every single scene is going to be completely different. So what we need to do is be fundamentally secure and sound with ladder ops before we can even consider rescue and other factors. Proper angle of inclination for climbing ground ladders. Again, we will talk about how to set that angle on a scene during the skills portion. Materials used in ladder construction and list the advantages and disadvantages of each type of material. So we have metal, wood, and fiberglass. What's the advantage of a metal ladder? What do you guys think? What is the advantage of a wood ladder? What is the advantage of a fiberglass ladder? I'm going to give you a second. I want you to write down some of your ideas, and after a second, we'll come up with some answers. Advantages of metal ladders is that they're very durable, they're going to hold their shape, and at the end of the day, our metal ladders are made out of aluminum. They're just as heavy as a wooden ladder. Now, a major disadvantage is that once that ladder is exposed to heat, or particularly high heat, the ladder is almost instantly out of service. There's really nothing you can do once that ladder's been exposed to heat. And once it shows heat damage, the ladder's trashed. You're going to have to order another one. Another major disadvantage is they're highly conductive to electricity. Now, wooden ladders, first thing you might think of is, well, wood would be good for the conduction of electricity. And technically that's true, but what you're not thinking of is what is the coating on a wood ladder. A wood ladder is always covered with some type of shellac or lacquer or paint. Well, that's going to be conductive. So a wood ladder is not necessarily any safer for operating in an electrical environment or an accidental electrical incursion. Now, the one big benefit of a wooden ladder is that in the event that that ladder is exposed to high temperatures, there's a really good chance that it's not going to have the structural problems that a metal ladder will. A wooden ladder is a lot more durable for a high heat scenario. The big problem with a wood ladder is the maintenance and care of a wood ladder is just a nightmare. It takes a phenomenal amount of work to be able to maintain a wooden ladder. And just for a quick side piece of your information, do you know of any fire departments in the U.S. that actually still use wooden ladders? I know of 2. And if you can remember, I'll tell you when we do the skills portion of this. Fiberglass ladders. What's the problems and benefits with a fiberglass ladder? Well, they're light, they're easy to move, they're relatively cheap to replace. Here's the problem. Fiberglass ladders are highly susceptible, once they've been damaged, to failure. Also, fiberglass ladders have a much lower weight load than wood or metal. Inspection and maintenance procedures for different types of ground ladders. Requirements pertaining to the frequency of inspection and the maintenance of ground ladders. Those ladders are required to be inspected every year. Okay. Now, what is the inspection? The inspection itself is pretty simple. It's a basic operation, it's a basic weight test, a load test, and then lastly is just to make sure all the labels are in place. And then inspection and maintenance procedures for ground ladders according to NFPA 1932. Here's the kicker. We're a volunteer fire department. Do we have to follow NFPA's recommendations? The short answer is no. Here's the correct answer. We should. Why? Because it's a lot safer. Would you trust a ladder that's been inspected every year for the last 20 years? Or would you trust a ladder that's been on a truck for 40 years and never looked at? It's just your life. It's your decision. Identify and explain the annual service test for ground ladders. We just talked about a little bit of it in the last slide. Here's an extension ladder that's getting tested. And there's the load test. Right there, you can see the ladder set up on some sawhorses. And in the middle, what they're going to hook up there is a large weight. And that ladder is going to be tested, I think it's 750 pounds. And it's a test for 15 minutes. And then while the ladder's being loaded, what they do is they do a general visual inspection of that ladder, and then you can see the labels. If you look towards the middle of the picture, they go through and make sure all the labels are in place. Last slide. Climbing the usable length of each type of ground and aerial ladder. Carrying firefighter tools or equipment while ascending and or descending. Bringing an injured person down, and the techniques of working from ground and aerial ladders with tools and appliances. Guys, this is a 100% skills, and I could talk until I'm blue in the face here and probably not make a lot of sense. It's so much easier in person and so much easier with skills. Again, guys, if you have any questions, concerns, comments, write them down, bring them to our class, and we'll answer them.